Tomorrow marks 1 year since a gunman murdered 17 students and teachers at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. The morning after the attack, I flew to Parkland and I met David Hogg, who had an immediate call to action, though he had just survived the shooting.
Please, this is the 18th one this year. That's unacceptable. We're children. You guys are the adults. You need to take some action and play a role. Work together, come over your politics, and get something done.
Joining us now are Parkland survivors, David Hogg and Ryan Deitch. Both of them are co-founders of the gun violence prevention organization, March for Our Lives. Guys, it is great to see you again this morning. And before we get to all that you've accomplished in the past year and all that you still want to do, David, if I could just go back to that morning that we first met, the morning, it was just really a few hours after the horror that you'd endured inside your high school. And so many people have been struck by how composed you already were and how you had already switched into action mode and how that was possible. And I just want to get your thoughts after a year of how you were already trying to tackle this back then.
I think really it's because of two classes that I had taken throughout my high school career, which were speech and debate, where we previously had to debate things like universal background checks and digitalization of ATF records, and also my experience in TV production as the school's TV news anchor co-host, and also the news director of the school.
I mean, that's remarkable. I remember you telling me that day, David, that was part of your composure and that you were comfortable sort of public speaking in a way that not everybody is. But in terms of emotionally, what has this year been like for you?
Oh, it's been an absolute roller coaster. But I think essentially from that day onward, the reason why I went out and spoke so early on was because for the first time in my life leading up to that point, I had felt like emotions. I had felt like I'd felt empathy for my sister, because at school that day, she had lost 4 friends. And I didn't want anybody else to have to go through that pain. I didn't want anybody else to have to hear the suffering that my sister went through that day. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to go out there and speak for those that couldn't at the time, like my sister or someone like Manuel Oliver and the other parents and siblings that had lost either siblings or children that day, for those that couldn't at the time, so that this wouldn't just be another mass shooting in the history of America.
So Ryan, what has happened? What has changed over the past year since that horrible day?
I mean, you can just see it in the laws that have been passed and that the lives that have been saved in this country since those laws have been passed. We've had, through our activism, through our speaking out and working with both politicians on the federal and local level, we've seen over 67 state laws be passed since the tragedy at our high school. And we see more and more federal bills being introduced, and more likely they're looking like they can pass. And we need them to pass, because we know that with these laws and with the change that we need to see happen, that these tragedies can be prevented. Because we do not want another tragedy. We do not want another school shooting, the same that we don't want another shooting on our streets.
And just to put a finer point on that, let me just put up a graphic that we've put together of the things that you all were able to get passed in Florida. You marched to the state capitol. I was there reporting on it. I think it was the week after the tragedy. You've got the minimum age raised to purchase a firearm in Florida to 21 from 18, banned the sale or possession of bump stocks, funding for mental health assistance in schools. You gave law enforcement greater power to seize weapons and ammo from the mentally unfit, which so many people thought could have helped in this situation, providing additional funding for armed school resource officers. And then there was also the idea of whether or not to arm teachers. And I want to ask you about that, both of you guys, whoever wants to take this. Every public school in Florida is now required to have one armed security guard because of what happened at Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And, there's so much debate about whether that's dangerous or whether that's the right answer. How do you all feel about that?
I for sure don't think arming teachers is a good idea. I think overall, we have to work to make sure that we're stopping shooters before they get on campus, because by the time they get there, it's already too late, because we know that somebody else is going to be lost through that process. We have to be working together, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans attacking the source of evil and being able to stop and reduce harm and stop violence before it happens, reduce it as it's happening, and increase, for example, ambulance response time after a horrible incident like occurred at our school.
And Ryan, just this week, something's happening in Congress, okay? Not just Florida, but, on a federal level, there's this bipartisan bill, and it is from Congressman Mike Thompson of California, a Democrat, and Peter King, a Republican of New York, and it is a universal background check bill they'll be voting on this week. Do you draw a direct line from what happened a year ago to this?
Absolutely. I mean, just from the activism that we have been able to inspire throughout the country, just through the work that our many chapters have been doing on the ground, and through other organizations like Moms Demand, we have seen that this change has occurred directly because of that work. We've seen gun sense candidates like Lucy McBath be introduced into Congress. We have seen people like our Congressman Ted Deutsch actually speak out on these issues more and more, not only to the press, but on the floor of the House. And we've seen that these introductions of these bills, we are working with them almost every single day. We have people lobbying in D.C., teenagers just like us lobbying in D.C. every day to speak out on issues like H.R. 8, and we want to make sure that these pass because these can and will save lives.
And I also think another important aspect is that we have to make sure we're properly funding violence intervention programs, especially in city communities like Life Camp, where in Jamaica, Queens, for example, in one community before an amazing woman known by the name of Erica Ford was able to go in 2001, there were 17 murders a year in one community. And through violence intervention programs and better mentoring programs and interrupting violence as it's happening, without increasing mass incarceration, they were able to take it from 17 murders in 1 year to 1 murder in the past 17 years.
And guys,
we need federal funding for those programs.
That is remarkable. But guys, very quickly, we're out of time, but how has this changed your life trajectory? I know that you're both approaching college or maybe already in it, Ryan, but what do you plan to do with your lives?
I plan to make sure that nobody else, no matter the zip code, has to live in constant fear of gun violence. And I plan to make sure that our generation is the last generation that has to live with the constant scourge of gun violence, no matter whether it's 17 people that are killed at our high school or one person that's shot and killed on their way to school, because we have to end gun violence in every zip code, in every single part of the United States.
Yeah, and I mean, just frankly, me and David both took a gap year this past year to work on this. And even though we might be going to college in the fall, we are going to continue this work.